I'm joined by Jeremy Edwards, a writer on European affairs. Jeremy, I just want to get your reaction to the speech and what Puigdemont had to say, opening the door for a dialogue, but for now, really holding off on any kind of formal declaration of independence.
Thank you, Asieh. It's a pleasure to be here. My personal opinion is that Puigdemont has made an excellent decision here and possibly the wisest of all decisions. The Spanish state effectively promised increased violence, more so than we saw on the 1st of October, in response to a unilateral declaration of independence. By putting off the matter, the declaration itself, Puigdemont has effectively defended his population from this potential violence. Secondly, there are strategic implications at play here. By extending the duration of this standoff, it allows time for international bodies, the EU in particular, to bring or put more pressure on the Spanish government to come to the table and to seek a diplomatic solution. Remember, even though Puigdemont has a democratic mandate to secure Catalan independence, he can only get there with a legally binding referendum in any political settlement, and that will only come if the international community puts pressure on the Spanish government. And like was said before, the ball is now firmly in Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy's court, who seem to be standing off quite a bit, and Puigdemont has now put the pressure back on him to make a decision here.
So, Jeremy, what will happen if Spain, which has refused to really negotiate up until this point, refuses to step down and hold talks with Puigdemont?
So Puigdemont has managed to keep the critical card in his back pocket. We could always see in 2 weeks' time a unilateral declaration of independence. But for now, we hope that the EU will step in and put more pressure on the Spanish government. If they continue to refuse to negotiate, they quite clearly will have rejected the olive branch that has been extended here by Puigdemont's suspension of the results of the referendum. So the ball, like I said, is very much firmly in Mariano Rajoy's court.
Spain has said this is an internal Spanish matter. Do you really think they're going to listen to anyone in the EU?
Well, Spain, is a core member of the EU, and its economic and political interests are very much threatened by the secession of Catalonia, which, of course, is a core producer for the Spanish economy and home to a large population or a large percentage of the Spanish population. No doubt their first reaction would be to protect Spain's core interests, but as the situation develops and unfolds, it can no longer be politically tenable for Spain to simply sit back in the expectation of a universal declaration of independence with the intention of going in with violent suppression of the Catalan people. So although that was the initial position of the European Union, it's very much likely that might change in the coming weeks.
Let me ask you this. Do you think already there were back-channel negotiations going on behind closed doors before he even made the speech? I mean, the speech was delayed by about an hour.
Well, I think perhaps the delay for the speech, or at least the whispers that I've heard, was a lack of consensus around the language that Puigdemont intended to use. He potentially might have lost some of his coalition support internally, and there were some last-minute negotiations to resolve that before he went out and spoke. I doubt that Rajoy was negotiating with the Catalan government in back channels, in large part because he wanted to see what Puigdemont would do, but also he has very strong economic incentives here and political incentives to make the most of this situation internally. If there is a universal declaration of independence, or if Puigdemont backs down in some way, that is a win for his People's Party. And it brings back dark memories of using a minority population to consolidate a majority ethnic population around a political leader. But that certainly would be to his political advantage. And at the same time, there would be no reason for him to be negotiating any potential deal before seeing whether Puigdemont indeed would back down.
What do you make of what he had to say, basically comparing the situation in Spain to UK and Brexit? How much is what we're seeing in Spain really have anything to do with Brexit, or even, let me bring a whole different thing into the equation, Donald Trump's America First strategy?
Well, in terms of Brexit, I can speak for myself in the sense that I do believe in the future of the European Union, or at least its ideals to promote peace, democracy, and prosperity on the continent as a supernatural level, or supranational level, excuse me. However, the reality of the EU is a far cry from its ideals, and there are worthwhile movements to reform the European Union, not least of which is DiEM25, led by Yanis Varoufakis. However, if the EU fails in its responsibility here to condemn the blatant police violence that the Spanish state has brought against the Catalan people, this will no longer just be a question about the inviolability of the economic structure of the EU. It'll call into question, the core principles of promoting democracy and peace that the EU is supposed to stand for.